The clock above the stove read 1 in the morning when Declan Ashworth carried a stranger through his own front door. She weighed nothing against his shoulder, gold dress creased, one shoe missing, breath sour with whiskey. He didn't know her name. He only knew she couldn't stand, couldn't speak past his address, and something about the alley behind the bar had made his skin crawl. By morning, she was gone. Only a scarf remained, folded on the couch. Monday, his supervisor stared at a photo on Declan's phone and went pale. "Where did you find her?" The night had started ordinary. Declan's shift at Ridgeline Dynamics ran until midnight that week, a burst pipe on the 4th floor keeping him later than he wanted. He was crossing the parking garage toward his truck when he heard it, a woman's voice, thin and unsteady, coming from the alley behind the corner bar. He almost kept walking. He didn't. She was propped against the brick, one heel snapped, gold dress catching the neon from the bar sign in a way that looked almost staged, except nothing about her face was staged. Her mascara had run. Her hands shook when she tried to push herself upright. "Ma'am, you okay?" She flinched at his voice like she'd been expecting someone else. Behind her, 30 feet down the alley, a man in a dark coat stood very still, watching, not approaching, just watching, the way a person watches something they intend to come back for. Declan didn't like that. He'd spent enough years reading rooms to know when a room was wrong. "Can you tell me your address?" "I'll call you a cab." She tried. The words came apart in her mouth, consonants sliding into nothing, and underneath the slurring he caught 4 words, repeated like a loop she couldn't break out of. "They're looking for me." He glanced back down the alley. The man in the coat was gone. He didn't ask more. He got her into his truck, buckled her in like she was made of glass, and drove the 12 minutes home, telling himself he'd sort it out once she was safe somewhere with a locked door. His apartment wasn't much, 2 bedrooms above a laundromat on the east side, but it had a couch and a deadbolt, and right now that was more than she had. She was asleep before he got her inside, curled into the couch cushions like she'd done it 100 times, like her body remembered exhaustion better than it remembered fear. He covered her with the throw blanket from the closet, checked twice that the door was locked, and went to bed with his own door cracked open, listening. Hazel found her first. His daughter padded into the living room at 6:40, hair a nest, sock feet silent on the hardwood, and stopped dead at the sight of a stranger asleep on their couch. She didn't scream. She turned and marched straight into Declan's room instead, hands on her hips. "Dad." "There's a lady." "I know, Bug. Is she a friend?" He sat up, rubbing his face. "Something like that. She had a rough night. She's going to sleep a little longer, okay? Cereal's in the cabinet." Hazel considered this with the seriousness of a 9-year-old weighing a diplomatic incident, then nodded and padded off toward the kitchen, already forgetting the stranger existed the way children forget most things that aren't cereal. Camille woke 40 minutes later to the smell of coffee and a 9-year-old staring at her from the kitchen doorway with open curiosity. She sat up too fast, the room tilting, and her hand went to her throat like she was checking for something that should have been there. "I have to go." "You don't have to. I have to go." She was already up, already searching for the shoe she'd lost somewhere in the last 12 hours, already moving toward the door with the particular urgency of someone who had done this before, who had a routine for waking up in strange places and leaving before anyone asked questions. "At least let me." The door shut before he finished the sentence. He found the scarf 20 minutes later, folded on the arm of the couch like she'd meant to take it and forgotten, gold silk with a monogram stitched into the corner in careful cursive, C.F. He almost went after her. Then Hazel called from the bathroom that she couldn't find her other shoe, and the moment closed over like water, and he told himself it didn't matter, that it was none of his business, that a woman with people looking for her in dark coats was not something a single father with a 9-year-old needed to go chasing into. He put the scarf in his truck's glove box instead of the trash. He couldn't have said why. Monday morning arrived gray and ordinary, the kind of day that gives no warning about what it's about to do to a person. Declan clocked in at 7, grabbed his radio from the supervisor's office, and was halfway through a work order when Marcus Doyle leaned over his shoulder to check a maintenance schedule on his phone. The screen was still open to a photo from Friday night, taken without thinking, a snapshot of the alley timestamp for his own records in case anyone asked why he'd left his post early. Camille was in the corner of the frame, blurred, gold dress, face turned half toward the camera. Marcus went still in a way that had nothing to do with maintenance schedules. "Who is that?" "Nobody. Just someone I helped out Friday night. Declan." Marcus's voice had dropped into a register. Declan had never heard from him in 3 years of working under the man, low and careful, like he was handling something that might go off. "Where did you find her?" "Behind Halloran's." "Why?" Marcus didn't answer right away. He glanced down the hallway, both directions, the way people glance when they're checking whether a conversation is safe to have, and when he spoke again, his voice had dropped even further. "You didn't see her again after that?" It wasn't a question. "No." "Why does it matter?" "It doesn't." Marcus straightened up, and something shuddered behind his eyes, professional and final. "Forget you saw her. Don't mention this to anyone in the building. Not HR. Not security. Not the guys on your crew. Nobody." "Marcus." "I mean it, Declan." He was already walking away, already reaching for a normalcy that didn't fit him anymore. "For your own sake." Declan stood in the hallway, holding his phone, staring at a blurred photograph of a woman he'd known for 6 hours, and felt the particular unease of a man who has just watched someone he trusts get scared of something without explaining what. He didn't get an answer that day. What he got, instead, was a different kind of noise, entirely radios crackling before dawn about a break-in attempt on the third-floor server room, badge access denied 4 times before the intruder gave up and vanished into the parking structure, and a building suddenly crawling with security staff who needed to verify who had clearance to what. It meant pulling personnel files. All of them, going back years, cross-referencing access levels against employment history, and somewhere in that scramble, 2 junior security guards standing by the coffee station did not lower their voices nearly enough. "You see Ashworth's old file? Facilities guy? The maintenance supervisor? Used to be Army CID, Criminal Investigation Division. Dude used to run federal-level fraud cases before he ended up here pushing a mop cart." "No way. Why'd he leave?" "Compliance dispute, from what I heard. Refused to sign off on something a few years back. Got sidelined for it." Declan, 20 feet away restocking a supply closet, heard every word and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that wouldn't confirm it, and because some old instinct told him this was not a story he wanted attached to his name inside these walls. He closed the closet door quietly and went back to work, but something in him had shifted, some dormant muscle remembering how to flex. That night, reviewing the hallway footage from the break-in for the 3rd time at a supervisor's request, he caught 4 frames. He almost missed a woman standing across the street from the building's side entrance, still, watching the entrance the way the man in the coat had watched the alley. Gold coat this time, not a dress, but the posture was unmistakable. He rewound it twice to be sure. It was her. The footage went nowhere. He didn't report it, didn't flag it, didn't mention the woman in the gold coat to Marcus, or to security, or to anyone standing in the break room speculating about his old file. Instead, he did something quieter. He pulled the timestamp, cross-referenced it against the building's visitor logs, found nothing, and started keeping a small notebook in the truck's glove box next to the scarf, the way he used to keep notebooks a long time ago in a different uniform, in rooms that smelled like coffee and bad decisions. Camille, 3 miles away, was doing her own version of disappearing. The apartment she'd rented under the name Claire Fenwick was small and beige and deliberately forgettable, the kind of place that left no fingerprints on a person's life. She'd learned, over 8 months, how to become unmemorable cash instead of cards, a burner phone that changed every few weeks, a haircut that made her look nothing like the woman in Ridgeline Dynamics' old employee directory. It had almost worked, until Friday night, until a man in a dark coat had found her 3 blocks from a bar she'd only picked because it was crowded enough to disappear into. Her burner phone rang at 11 that night. Unknown number. Miss Ford. A voice she didn't recognize, flat and unhurried, the kind of calm that was worse than shouting. "You're getting careless." She hung up, hands shaking so badly she dropped the phone twice, trying to power it off. She didn't sleep. She sat in the dark by the window instead, thinking about a stranger's apartment with a 9-year-old's drawings taped to the refrigerator and a man who hadn't asked her a single question he didn't need the answer to. She thought about the scarf. She should have gone back for it. Back at Declan's, Hazel had not forgotten the stranger nearly as thoroughly as her father hoped. Is the scarf lady coming back? They were at the kitchen table. Hazel's homework spread out in the particular chaos of a 9-year-old who organizes by throwing everything down at once. Declan looked up from a stack of work orders he wasn't really reading. "I don't know, Bug. You kept her scarf." "I did. That means you think she's coming back." He didn't have an answer for that one, so he reached over and fixed the math worksheet she'd turned upside down instead, and Hazel let it go the way children let things go, not because the question was answered, but because there was a show she wanted to watch and homework wasn't going to finish itself. Later, after she was asleep, he took the scarf out of the glove box and sat with it at the kitchen table under the one working light, running his thumb over the stitched initials, C.F. He thought about Marcus's face in the hallway. He thought about the man in the dark coat. He thought about a woman standing very still across the street from a building where someone had just tried to break into a server room, and he made a decision that surprised him with how easy it was to make. He wasn't going to ask Marcus again. Marcus had made it clear that door was closed, but there were other doors, and Declan had spent 6 years of his life learning how to find them without knocking too loud. He started with the initials. C.F. wasn't much, but he'd built cases on less. He pulled up Ridgeline's old investor filings that night, scrolling past faces he didn't recognize, until he stopped on one from 18 months back. Camille Ford, Vice President of Finance. The photo was professional, hair different, expression guarded in the specific way corporate photography demands, but the eyes were the ones that had looked up at him in an alley behind Halloran's and said, "They're looking for me." He closed the laptop. He didn't tell Marcus. He didn't tell anyone. He just sat there, a long moment in the quiet of his own kitchen, feeling the particular vertigo of a man who has just realized the woman he carried home unconscious used to run the finance department of the company that currently paid him to fix leaking pipes. He put the scarf back in the glove box. He'd give it back to her himself whenever their paths crossed again. Something told him they would. Their paths crossed 9 days later, in a coffee shop 2 blocks from Ridgeline Dynamics, in the kind of coincidence that only counts as one the first time it happens. He saw her before she saw him, a woman in a gray coat with her hair pulled back, waiting at the counter with the stillness of someone trying very hard to take up no space at all. He almost let her go. Then she turned, and their eyes met. And something in her face went through 3 separate emotions in under a second: recognition, panic, and then a flat, practiced blankness that fooled nobody. "I don't think we've met," she said. "No," he agreed. "I don't think we have." He held out the scarf anyway, gold silk folded neatly into a small square he'd carried in his jacket pocket for exactly this purpose, though he hadn't admitted that to himself until this moment. "You left this." She stared at it, like it might be a trick. "I don't know what that is." "Okay." He set it on the counter beside her coffee instead of pushing the point, and turned to leave, because he'd meant what he told himself in the kitchen. He wasn't going to chase this, wasn't going to interrogate a stranger who clearly needed to not be interrogated. He'd done enough of that in his old life to know the difference between curiosity and cruelty. "Wait." He turned back. She was looking at the scarf now, not at him, thumb resting against the stitched initials like she was checking they were real. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for that night, and for not asking. You don't owe me anything." "I know." She picked up the scarf, folded it once more, smaller, and tucked it into her bag like something fragile. That's sort of the problem. He didn't ask what she meant. He bought his coffee and left her at the counter, and if he glanced back once through the window before crossing the street, he told himself it didn't mean anything. It became a pattern after that, the kind neither of them named out loud. She started coming to the same coffee shop on the mornings he stopped in before his shift, never sitting with him, but there, consistently. He learned the rhythm of her without learning the facts of her, the way she always sat facing the door, eyes tracking every person who walked in before she relaxed, the way she drank her coffee black and too fast, like she was afraid of being interrupted before she finished. He never mentioned the investor filing, never mentioned Vice President of Finance, or the 18-month-old photograph, or the particular way Marcus Doyle's face had gone pale over a blurred phone screen. Something about the careful architecture of her silence told him it mattered more to preserve than to dismantle, and Declan had spent enough years learning patience to know when a person needed time more than they needed answers. 3 floors above the coffee shop, inside a boardroom with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Denver skyline, Barrett Kessler was having a very different kind of morning. "I want badge logs pulled for every entrance, going back 2 weeks," he said, not looking up from the tablet in front of him. "I want a name on whoever tried to get into that server room." The head of security shifted. "Sir, if this is about the break-in, this isn't about the break-in." Kessler's voice stayed level. The levelness of a man who'd learned anger was less useful than precision. "This is about a leak. Someone outside this building has information they shouldn't have, and I want it contained." He didn't say her name. He didn't need to. The tension in the room told the story clearly enough to anyone paying attention, and Barrett Kessler had spent 8 months paying very close attention. 2 blocks away, unaware she was the subject of a closed-door meeting she'd never be invited to, Camille sat across a coffee shop counter from a man she was slowly, carefully, allowing herself to trust, and neither of them said a word about how dangerous that trust might be. The call came through Marcus's office 2 weeks later, routed from a consulting firm Ridgeline Dynamics used for system audits, requesting a temporary contractor be given facility access to assess the building's aging infrastructure ahead of a planned server room upgrade. Marcus approved it without much thought, signed the paperwork, and didn't look twice at the name on the contractor badge until the woman herself was standing in his doorway. He looked twice then. "Miss Fenwick," he said carefully, using the name on the badge, his eyes saying something entirely different than his mouth. "Welcome to Ridgeline. I'll have someone from facilities walk you through the building." That someone was Declan. Neither of them had arranged it. Neither of them had expected it. Standing in the facilities office at 8 in the morning while Marcus explained the assignment with the strained casualness of a man handling a small explosive he hadn't chosen to be holding, and for one long beat they simply looked at each other. 2 people who had spent weeks pretending not to know each other, now required, by pure institutional accident, to work side by side. "Mr. Ashworth will show you the mechanical systems," Marcus said. "He knows this building better than anyone." "I'm sure he does," Camille said. They worked well together, which surprised neither of them and unsettled both of them in equal measure. She asked precise questions about load-bearing systems and server room cooling. He gave precise answers, walking her floor by floor with the ease of a man who'd spent 3 years learning every pipe in the building, and somewhere between the 2nd floor and the 4th, the conversation stopped being about infrastructure and started being about nothing at all. The weather, Denver traffic, nothing that mattered, and everything that did. They were on the ground floor, wrapping up, when Hazel appeared. It was Bring Your Kid to Work Day, a Ridgeline tradition Declan usually dreaded and Hazel usually loved, and she came skidding into the lobby in her school shoes with one lace flapping loose, breathless from running ahead of the facility's intern who'd been watching her. "Dad, my shoe." Camille was crouched in front of her before Declan could even move, tying the lace with the quick, practiced motions of someone who had done this 100 times for someone else's child once, long ago, in a life that had nothing to do with server rooms or badge access or men in dark coats. "There," she said, tugging the knot snug. "Good?" Hazel looked at her with the frank, assessing curiosity of a 9-year-old. "You're the scarf lady," Camille's hands stilled for half a second. I suppose I am. Dad kept your scarf in the truck for weeks. Hazel. Declan's voice carried a warning that had no real weight behind it. Camille looked up at him, something soft moving across her face that hadn't been there in the coffee shop, in the badge photo, in any version of her he'd seen so far. Did he? It's a nice scarf, Hazel said, already losing interest, already looking toward the elevator bank where the intern was calling her name. Bye, scarf lady. She was gone in a clatter of sneakers before either adult could respond, and for a moment neither of them tried to. Marcus watched from the mezzanine above, arms crossed, and the look on his face had nothing to do with warmth. He'd heard the words leak and contain in that boardroom 2 weeks ago, and now he was watching the very thing Kessler was hunting for stand in his own lobby, in full view of the cameras Kessler had specifically asked to be monitored. He said nothing. He turned and walked back toward his office, already composing an excuse for why a consulting contractor had spent the morning shadowing his facility's supervisor. That night, Camille's burner phone buzzed once with a message from a number she didn't recognize. No words at first, just a photograph herself, crouched in the Ridgeline lobby, Hazel's small hand visible at the edge of the frame. Then the text arrived. 3 lines, no signature. Stop before someone else gets hurt. You know what happens to people who don't listen. You have until Friday. She sat very still for a long time after that, phone shaking slightly in her hand, and for the first time in 8 months of running, the fear she felt wasn't for herself. Priya Anand had not slept properly in 8 months either, though for different reasons. She still worked in compliance at Ridgeline Dynamics, still sat 2 floors below the executive suite processing audit reports that increasingly felt like fiction, and she still remembered, with a clarity that kept her awake most nights, the afternoon Camille Ford had walked into her office with a flash drive and asked her to make a copy of something before it disappeared from the system entirely. She'd made the copy. She'd told herself it was just due diligence, just an employee helping another employee back up files before a system migration, and she'd buried that flash drive in a locked drawer at home and tried, mostly successfully, to forget it existed. Camille found her outside the parking structure on a Thursday evening, 6 days after the text message, looking nothing like the composed executive Priya remembered, and everything like a woman who had run out of places to run. I need your help, Camille. Priya's voice cracked on the name, unused for months. You shouldn't be here. If anyone sees, I know, I wouldn't ask if I had another option. They ended up in Priya's car, engine off, parked at the far end of the structure where the cameras had a known blind spot Camille remembered from her own years working in the building. Priya's hands shook on the steering wheel the entire time she talked, but she talked, finally, after 8 months of silence, everything she'd been carrying alone. I still have the drive. I never looked at it. Not really, not after the first time. I was too scared. But I know what's on it, roughly. Emails, financial routing that didn't match anything in the official ledgers. And she stopped, swallowed. And something else. Something I found by accident, later, when I was cleaning out an old shared drive nobody uses anymore. What? Approval chains. For your termination. And Priya's voice dropped almost to nothing. For someone else's. She pulled the flash drive from her glove compartment, small and unremarkable, and handed it over like it weighed considerably more than it did. Camille read it that night on a laptop she'd bought with cash from a pawn shop 3 months ago, and the story it told was worse and more precise than anything she'd imagined in 8 months of imagining. Emails between Barrett Kessler and a shell financial entity dated back 3 years, routing funds through accounts that existed nowhere in Ridgeline's official books. Her own termination memo, drafted by Kessler personally, backdated to make it look like her resignation had preceded her discovery of the fraud rather than followed it. And beneath that, buried in a folder marked Personnel Archived, a name she recognized from a photograph on a financial news site. Declan Ashworth, Termination Review, Security Division, 4 years prior. Reason for reassignment, Refusal to authorize compliance sign-off on Q3 financial audit. Approved by B. Kessler. She read it 3 times before she understood what it meant. The man who had carried her home unconscious, who had returned her scarf without asking a single question, who had let his 9-year-old daughter call her the scarf lady in a company lobby, he hadn't found her by accident. Not entirely. They had both been standing, for years, in the wreckage of the same man's decisions, without either of them knowing the other existed. Something in her chest that had been clenched for 8 months finally, quietly, broke open. 3 miles away, Declan sat in his own kitchen with the break-in footage open on his laptop for the 4th time, running it frame by frame, and this time he wasn't looking at the woman across the street. He was looking at the man who'd appeared briefly in a corner of the frame 2 minutes earlier. Dark coat, unhurried walk, directing 2 other figures toward the parking structure with small, precise gestures before stepping back out of frame himself. He'd seen that walk before. Once, briefly, from a boardroom doorway he'd passed 100 times without paying attention, the particular economical stride of a man used to being obeyed without raising his voice. He pulled up the Ridgeline Executive Directory. Barrett Kessler, Chief Operating Officer. He sat back in his chair, the pieces arranging themselves with the clean, cold clarity he remembered from another life, and understood, finally, exactly what kind of trouble the woman with the scarf had walked into. She came to his apartment on a Friday night, the same night the anonymous text had given her as a deadline, and when he opened the door, she was standing there, in the gray coat with the flash drive in her hand like an offering she wasn't sure he'd accept. "I need to tell you something," she said. "All of it. And I need you to know I'm not asking you to fix it. I just can't keep lying to the one person who's been decent to me for no reason." He let her in. Hazel was already asleep, and they sat at the same kitchen table where he'd once run his thumb over her stitched initials, trying to guess what kind of trouble they belonged to. She told him everything, the audit, the termination dressed up as a resignation, 8 months of cash and burner phones and a name that wasn't hers, the man in the dark coat, the photograph of her crouched beside his daughter with a threat attached. She told it plainly, the way people tell the truth once they've run out of energy to tell it any other way. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he told her his part. "I used to be an investigator. Army CID. I left after my wife died, not because of Hazel. I could have made that work. I left because the job needed a version of me that didn't have anything left to give. I moved into corporate security here. 4 years ago, I was asked to sign off on a quarterly audit that didn't add up. I refused. 2 weeks later, I was reassigned to facilities." He paused. The name on the order was Kessler's. Camille's hand found the edge of the table. "He's the reason you're fixing pipes, and he's the reason you've been sleeping in a different bed every few weeks for 8 months. He reached across the table, not quite touching her hand, close enough that the choice was hers to close the distance. "We didn't find each other by accident, Camille. We found each other because the same man broke both our lives and never once had to look either of us in the eye while he did it." She closed the distance. Her hand covered his, steady for the first time in months. Neither of them heard the truck pull up outside until it was too late to matter. The break-in happened fast, the way these things do when the people doing it have done it before a side window forced, 2 figures moving through Declan's apartment with the efficient purpose of people looking for one object and nothing else. They didn't know Hazel was there until she stood frozen in her bedroom doorway, watching a stranger tear through her father's kitchen drawers. She didn't scream. She went very still instead. And it was that stillness that bought Declan the 2 seconds he needed. He came through the front door, already moving, 4 years of civilian softness burning off in an instant, replaced by something older, trained, precise. The first man went down before he finished turning around. The second lasted 4 seconds longer, long enough to get one hand on Hazel's shoulder before Declan put him on the ground hard enough that he didn't get back up before the sirens arrived. Camille had Hazel wrapped in her arms against the far wall, both of them shaking by the time it was over. "You're okay," Camille kept saying, into Hazel's hair, to herself as much as to the child. "You're okay. You're okay." Marcus Doyle arrived 20 minutes later, called by a neighbor, and stood taking in the wreckage the broken window. Two men in police custody. Camille holding the childlike glass, Declan breathing hard with the clarity of a man who just remembered exactly who he used to be. Marcus had spent 8 months afraid of exactly this moment. Looking at it now, the fear had gone somewhere else entirely. "I'll testify," he said, before anyone asked him to. "Whatever's on that drive, whatever Kessler did to either of you, I'll say it under oath." Camille looked up at him over Hazel's shoulder, eyes wet, and nodded once. They spent the rest of that night at the same kitchen table, 4 people and a flash drive and a 9-year-old finally asleep on the couch, building the case that would end Barrett Kessler's career. The Ridgeline Dynamics boardroom looked different in daylight, Camille thought, sitting at the long table she'd once occupied as vice president of finance, now facing it as something closer to a witness in her own life's undoing. 8 members of the board sat across from her, along with outside counsel and a federal investigator who'd been looped in the moment. Priya's flash drive left the building through proper channels instead of a parking structure blind spot. Priya went first, hands steady in a way they hadn't been in the car 6 days earlier, walking the board through the email chain, the shell accounts, the routing that matched nothing in the official ledgers. She'd printed everything, built a timeline even the board members with no finance background could follow. Marcus went second, and his voice didn't shake either, though everyone could see what it cost him. He confirmed the reassignment order for Declan Ashworth, signed by Kessler 2 weeks after Declan refused to authorize a fraudulent audit sign-off. He confirmed his own complicity, the years of silence he'd kept out of fear for his pension, and he did not ask for forgiveness while he did it, which somehow made the room more willing to give it. Kessler sat at the far end of the table through all of it, expression unreadable, until Camille stood to speak. "I discovered the discrepancy in March," she said, voice even despite everything underneath it. "I brought it to Mr. Kessler directly, as protocol required. Within a week, I was informed my resignation had been accepted. I never submitted one. This is absurd," Kessler said, the first thing he'd said in 20 minutes. "She's fabricating a narrative to explain her own. The termination memo has your digital signature and a timestamp 4 days before I was told to leave the building," Camille said. "You backdated it." Sloppily, as it turns out. The room went quiet in the particular way rooms go quiet when the last thread of a lie finally gives out. Kessler had nothing else to offer. No explanation that survived contact with the printed timeline in front of the board, and when the vote came, it came fast and unanimous. Immediate termination, effective that hour. Full cooperation with federal investigators, security escorting him from the building before the meeting had even fully adjourned. He didn't look at Camille on his way out. He looked at Declan instead, standing near the door where he'd been asked to wait in case the board had questions about the security footage, and something passed between them that needed no words recognition, maybe, of exactly how much damage one man's convenience could do to 2 lives he'd never bothered to consider. Across town, Hazel sat at Marcus Doyle's kitchen table with a box of crayons, dropped off that morning with the vague explanation that Dad and the scarf lady had an important meeting. She took the news with characteristic pragmatism and requested crayons, and by the time the vote was happening 3 miles away, she'd produced a crooked drawing of a stick-figure man in a hard hat beside a stick-figure woman with a scarf, both of them smiling. "Who's this for?" Marcus asked, glancing over from the coffee pot. "You," Hazel said, like it was obvious. "Because you helped Dad." Marcus took the drawing with more care than the moment probably required, and taped it to his own refrigerator when he got home that evening, where it stayed for a long time after. Declan and Camille walked out of Ridgeline Dynamics together that afternoon, past the lobby where a 9-year-old had once tied nothing more complicated than a shoelace into a parking lot washed gold with early evening light. Neither of them said much. There wasn't much left that needed saying about Kessler, about the board, about 8 months of running, or 4 years of quiet demotion. What was left unsaid was something else entirely, and both of them knew it, and neither of them reached for it yet. "Thank you," Camille said finally, at her car door. For all of it. The scarf, the couch. Not asking questions I wasn't ready to answer. You don't have to thank me. I know. She almost smiled. That's still sort of the problem. She got in her car and drove away, and he stood in the parking lot a while longer than he needed to, watching the space where her taillights had been. 3 weeks passed, the way weeks pass after an ending slower than expected, full of small readjustments nobody warns you about. Camille was reinstated formally in the second week, vice president of finance again, her real name back on the door and the directory and the paycheck, and the board offered her, along with the reinstatement, a generous relocation package to their newer office in Austin, a fresh start somewhere Barrett Kessler's name wouldn't hang in every hallway she walked down. She turned it down without much deliberation. She told the board it was because Ridgeline needed continuity during the transition. She told herself, privately, in the quiet of an apartment she was finally furnishing under her own name, that it had more to do with a kitchen table 2 miles east, a 9-year-old's crooked drawings, and a man who had never once asked her to explain herself before he decided she was worth helping. Declan was offered his old position back too, corporate security, full title restored, the kind of offer that would have meant something enormous to him 4 years ago. He sat with it for a week before he turned it down as well. Not because the money didn't matter, but because the job had once demanded hours that didn't leave room for school pickups and bedtime stories, and he'd built an entire second life around not missing those anymore. He negotiated something smaller, instead, a security consulting role with better pay and the same facilities schedule, enough to matter without costing him what mattered more. Camille came by the apartment on a Tuesday evening, unannounced, the same door she'd once fled through at dawn without a word. This time she knocked, waited, and when he opened it, she held out the scarf, gold silk, freshly cleaned, folded into the same small square he'd once returned to her in a coffee shop. "I think this belongs with you now," she said. "I thought you liked that scarf." "I do. That's why I'm giving it back." She smiled, and there was nothing guarded in it this time. "Consider it a standing invitation. Every time you see it, you'll remember you're the reason I'm still in Denver." He took it, and tucked into the folds he found a small piece of paper, her handwriting careful and deliberate in a way that suggested she'd rewritten it more than once. "Thank you for not asking. I'm ready to answer now, whenever you want to ask." Hazel, blissfully unaware of the 8 months of fraud, threats, and boardroom testimony that had led to this particular Tuesday evening, greeted Camille's reappearance with the enthusiasm of a child reunited with a favorite toy. "Scarf lady, do you know how to play sorry?" "I do, actually. Nobody in this house plays fair." "I find that very hard to believe," Camille said, glancing at Declan, who held up both hands in mock innocence and lost the next 3 rounds spectacularly, on purpose, while his daughter shrieked with laughter loud enough to carry through the thin apartment walls. Marcus Doyle's own small vindication came a few days later, in a quieter form. The board, reviewing the full record of Kessler's conduct, formally recognized Marcus's testimony as instrumental to the case, restored the seniority he'd quietly sacrificed years of comfort to protect, and offered a public acknowledgement he hadn't expected and almost didn't know how to accept gracefully. He kept Hazel's crayon drawing on his refrigerator through all of it, past the point most refrigerator art gets quietly retired, because some things earn a longer stay than others. None of it undid 8 months of fear, or 4 years of a career detoured by one man's convenience. But something had settled that hadn't been settled before. In 3 separate lives that had spent a long time bracing for a blow that had finally, fully landed and passed. Sunday morning arrived clear and cold, the Rockies sharp and blue-white against the sky the way they only get after the first real frost of the season, and Declan took Hazel to the park near the foothills the way they did most weekends, a thermos of hot chocolate between them and no particular plan beyond letting his daughter run until she wore herself out. Camille was already there when they arrived, mid-run, breath fogging in front of her, and if either of them told themselves this was a coincidence, neither believed it especially hard. "Scarf lady." Hazel took off across the grass before Declan could stop her, and Camille slowed to a jog, then a walk, catching Hazel in a loose hug that had become, somewhere in the last few weeks, entirely unremarkable between them. "Fancy meeting you here," Camille said, over Hazel's head, to Declan. "Small park, big city. Sure it is." They walked together after that, the three of them, no particular direction, Hazel narrating an increasingly elaborate story about a squirrel she'd apparently befriended on a previous visit, and neither adult mentioned the boardroom, or Kessler, or 8 months of fear, or 4 years of quiet reassignment. There didn't seem to be any need. Some things, once survived together, don't require repeating. They reached a fallen log near the creek, weathered smooth by years of kids climbing over it, and Hazel scrambled toward it with the fearless confidence of a 9-year-old who had not yet learned that logs can be more slippery than they look. She wobbled at the top, arms windmilling, and both adults reached for her at once, Declan's hand and Camille's hand closing around her small arms from either side, steadying her together. Hazel landed safely on the other side, already running off toward the creek bank, entirely unaware of what had just happened 6 inches above her head. Declan's hand was still there. So was Camille's. Neither of them moved first, and neither of them pulled away, standing at the log with their hands resting together in the cold morning air, watching a 9-year-old crouch by the water, looking for frogs that had long since gone into hiding for the winter. "I never actually asked you," Declan said finally, "what you wanted to answer in the note." "I know. Are you going to make me ask?" She turned to look at him, and there was nothing guarded left in her face at all. None of the careful blankness from the coffee shop, none of the fear from the alley behind Halloran's. Just a woman standing in a park in the cold, holding a stranger's hand who had stopped being a stranger somewhere around the 3rd time he chose not to ask her a question she wasn't ready for. "Come to dinner Friday," she said instead. "My place this time. I'll cook. You bring her." She nodded toward Hazel, still crouched at the creek's edge. "As a guest, this time, not someone I'm running from. I think we can manage that." "Good." She squeezed his hand once before letting go, though not entirely, her fingers finding his again a moment later as they started walking toward the creek, toward Hazel, toward whatever came next for 3 people who had found each other through the wreckage of a man who never had to look either of them in the eye. This time, no one had to go looking for anyone. They had simply, quietly, stayed.